Well, hello there. This is the first part of a three-part series that we are going to be doing on what is called the paradox of horror. So what is the paradox of horror? Oh, let me say that right. What is the paradox of horror? Not the paradox of horror. That's something very different. So in the October 1993 issue of the Journal of Aesthetics, author and professor Boris Gout published an article called, wait for it, The Paradox of Horror, which I believe is a term coined by Noel Carroll in 1990, but we'll get into that in a minute. But the important part is that in this article, Dr. Gout discusses the somewhat obvious idea that people enjoy horror even though it produces negative emotions in us. So when you go see a horror movie, you feel things like fear and sorrow and disgust. These are negative emotions. They're bad. And in any other context, they're terrible things. Yet we enjoy them in horror films. In fact, not only do we enjoy them, we'll pay $15 a ticket to go see a horror film that has these things in it. And so there's kind of a paradox there. We're enjoying things that are not enjoyable. So one solution to this, offered by Noel Carroll in his book, The Philosophy of Horror, is that it's not really the negative emotions that we enjoy when we go see a horror film, but instead some curiosity that the movie offers us. So for example, think of the movie Scream. In Scream, there's throats being slit, people are being gutted, teenagers are just dying left and right. It's a pretty tense film that produces a lot of negative emotion. And what Noel Carroll would argue is that what we're really more into is the curiosity of who Ghostface is in the story, or why Ghostface is after Sidney Prescott. That's why we enjoy Scream. We want to know who the killer is, why he or she is after Sidney, and will Sidney make it out alive? Now, Dr. Gout calls this the positives outweigh the negatives solution to the paradox of horror. So in other words, wanting to know who Ghostface is outweighs us putting up with watching Drew Barrymore be hacked to death. And there's other curiosities that Noel Carroll offers us besides just the unmasking of a monster. For example, the origin story of the monster. I mean, think of all of the recent films that utilize this as a curiosity. You have Annabelle and Annabelle Creation from the Conjuring series, The Nun from the Conjuring series, Jeepers Creepers, Paranormal Activity, The Ring, Saw. I mean, even all of the classic horror villains have entire movies made about their origin story. Freddy, Jason, Pinhead, Michael Myers, Hannibal Lecter, it just goes on and on. So I mean, at face value, that seems like a good response given how much we dedicate to this particular curiosity within the horror genre. So, to Noel Carroll, we're giving something up, as it were. We're paying in the currency of our negative emotions in order to obtain the answers to these curiosities we have. Curiosities about the monster, who they are, their motivation, and if the protagonist will make it out alive. So it's kind of a trade-off. And the obvious caveat here is that we're all pretty much aware that there's a fundamental difference between the negative emotions of watching someone's leg get sawed off in a movie and watching that happen in real life. It's a beast with no claws when it's fiction. It's the lion behind plexiglass. So those negative emotions then become more stomachable. And that matters because we're sort of weighing these two things against one another. Curiosity, negative emotion. So that's Noel Carroll's view, but Dr. Gout takes issue with this. He takes issue with the curiosity argument, and here's why. He argues that horror films are too formulaic for curiosity to be primary. In other words, monsters, plots, storylines, tropes, they're also prescribed and stereotypical throughout the body of the horror genre that curiosity can't really weigh all that much. Now, I kind of find this response to be a little bullshit. Because yes, obviously horror films can often be formulaic, but you can say that about all genres of film. Like, we've all seen How to Lose a Guy in 10 Things I Hate About Bridget Jones's Diary while checking your You've Got Mail. I mean, my God. Like, at some point, all genre becomes formulaic. It's even in part how we separate genres. Also, I think that the claim that the horror genre is too formulaic for curiosity to matter all that much is just flat out false. At least it is today. Now, in 1993, when this article was written, the argument probably carried a bit more weight. I mean, it's been 30 years since this article was written. Things have changed quite a bit. And I would argue that horror films in that era felt way more compacted and rigid and tropey than they do today. It doesn't mean they're not prepackaged and formulaic today. Many of them are. But I think that's much less of an issue now than it was back then. So follow me here. To get back on track, Dr. Gout rejects the curiosity argument of Noel Carroll because he says it's too formulaic. The horror genre is just too formulaic. He also argues, and this is interesting, that it doesn't explain the phenomena that people will leave horror films complaining that it wasn't scary enough. In other words, they went to the movie looking for fright. If a complaint is that the film is not scary enough, you were looking for scary. And if you're looking for scary, then you're looking for all of those original things that we talked about earlier that comprise those negative emotions. You're looking for negative emotions. And so that's why Dr. Gout rejects Noel Carroll's curiosity argument. So what do you guys think? Where do you stand on this debate? Negative emotions, curiosity. What do you think? Do we watch horror films because we enjoy negative emotions? Because if we do, that needs an explanation. Or do we simply put up with it because it gives us a cathartic release for our curiosities? Now, careful how you answer this, because in part 2 of this series, I'll unpack the theory that Dr. Gout actually thinks explains the paradox of horror. He rejects Noel Carroll's interpretation for the reasons that we've just gone over, but he accepts another theory, one that we'll talk about and critique in the next video. So as always, leave a like, hit that subscribe button, check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Thanks for watching, and I will see you for part 2.